Welcome back to the Crime Whisper, where tonight's story takes a haunting twist. We've journeyed through the beginnings of the Inman family, their modest Ohio roots, the rise and fall of their homegrown ministry, the cracks forming beneath their carefully curated image of piety and perfection. But now, we enter the final, tragic chapter. March 22nd, 2011, Logan, Ohio. It was just after 11 p.m. Summer had finished her shift cleaning the Century National Bank in downtown Logan. She often left late, heading to her car in the dark and quiet parking lot nearby. But that night, she never made it home. Witnesses would later recall seeing a silver car lurking in the shadows. Surveillance footage captured a chilling image: Summer being forcibly taken, screaming, struggling, shoved into the back of a vehicle by multiple individuals. The car sped off into the night. When Summer didn't return home, Adam Peters reported her missing. Her family was immediately alarmed, knowing full well the contentious custody battle and restraining orders. Police launched a full investigation, and quickly, all eyes turned to Will Inman and his parents. What investigators found shocked the entire community. Within days, evidence began to mount against the Inman's cell phone records. GPS tracking and surveillance footage painted a damning picture. The abduction was no random act. It was premeditated, planned, and horrifyingly, a family affair. Authorities uncovered that William Inman Sr., Sandra Inman, and William Will Inman Jr. had all conspired in Summer's abduction. It appeared their goal was to regain custody of the children by force, but when Summer refused to comply, the story turned darker. Her lifeless body was discovered a week later in a septic tank behind an abandoned church in nearby Athens County. She had been strangled with a zip tie. Investigators said she was likely killed the same night she was kidnapped. The arrests and trial: all three Inmans were arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder. The courtroom was packed, the small Ohio community reeling with disbelief that a family so revered in their church could be capable of something so heinous. Sandra Inman, in a shocking move, took a plea deal. She confessed to luring Summer into the trap and helped lead authorities to her body. She was sentenced to 15 years to life. Will Inman Jr., Summer's estranged husband, was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. William Inman Sr. was also convicted and received the same sentence: life without parole. What really happened that night? The chilling truth is that Summer sensed this was coming. Her journal entries revealed not only fear, but prophetic clarity. She wrote of the emotional and physical control Will had over her, of his threats and fantasies, and of her own desperation to break free. She tried to build a new life, but the past wouldn't let go. Summer Cook Inman was just 25 years old, a mother of 3, a woman trying to reclaim her life, and in doing so, she lost it. Tonight, as you drift off, remember, behind the facade of perfection, some homes are full of secrets, and some families will do anything to maintain control. You've been listening to The Crime Whisper. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, how did you first hear about this case? Until next time, stay safe and stay curious. Narrator.com, Whispery Tone. Hi everyone. Welcome back to The Crime Whisper. I know you can't sleep, so I'll keep you company with true stories, dark, tragic, and all too real, from every corner of the world. But first, tell me, where did you hear about this case? Let me know in the comments, and if these stories keep you intrigued, or help you drift off into uneasy dreams, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let's get into tonight's story. Narrator. March 22nd, 2011, Logan, Ohio. A 25-year-old mother named Summer Inman was just finishing her late-night shift cleaning the Century National Bank. It was quiet, close to 11 p.m., and the town had already fallen asleep. Summer, exhausted but ready to see her children, stepped outside to take out the trash. She'd texted her partner Adam Peters earlier, asking him to meet her after work. But by 11:30, Adam was still waiting, and Summer hadn't appeared. Concerned, he drove to the bank and began looking for her. What he found chilled him to the core. Near a dumpster, in a dark alley behind the bank, were Summer's personal belongings, scattered on the ground. Her phone, her keys, her music player still playing, headphones lying in the grass, and her jacket discarded nearby. Adam panicked. He called Summer's parents right away. They tried calling the bank, hoping she'd stayed late or misplaced her things, but the security staff had no answers. With growing dread, they contacted the Logan Police Department. Summer was officially reported missing. Narrator Police responded to the scene and quickly learned that this wasn't just a missing person case. It was an abduction. 3 witnesses came forward with a disturbing account. 2 women out for a late jog had seen Summer moments before the incident. As she disposed of the trash, a white Ford Crown Victoria approached. A blonde woman was behind the wheel. Suddenly, 2 masked individuals jumped out, wearing black clothing and balaclavas, and grabbed Summer. She fought, screaming for help. One bystander tried to intervene, but the blonde driver sprayed him with pepper spray, forcing him to back off. The attackers shoved Summer into the car and sped away. The 2 joggers immediately ran to the nearest police station to report what they'd seen. At first, officers were skeptical. It sounded like something from a movie, too organized, too aggressive for small-town Ohio. But then they found the scene behind the bank, and everything began to fall into place. Summer Inman had been taken, and not by strangers. Narrator: the entire community mobilized. Flyers went up. News stations covered the story. Search parties were organized. Days passed, 3 of them, and still no trace of Summer. In her absence, Summer's family held on to hope. Just days before, she had shared a Facebook photo, a sweet snapshot of herself with Adam and her children. A new chapter had just begun for her, and now she was gone. What many didn't know was how deeply connected Summer still was to her past, specifically to the Inman family. Her estranged husband, William Will Inman Jr., was still listed as a Facebook friend of Adam Peters, the man Summer was now with. Strange, right? The backstory made it even more uncomfortable. A year earlier, Adam had been hired by the Inmans for odd jobs around their home. That's how he met Summer. Their friendship became something more. Summer felt conflicted. Her journal reveals the inner torment. When I looked into his eyes, I realized the devil had taken over me. I didn't listen to what God was telling me. My mind screamed run, but instead, I stayed and let him embrace me. That relationship marked the unraveling of Summer's marriage to Will Inman. She filed for divorce, but the process dragged on, bitter, controlling, and hostile. Will fought for full custody, even offering a mere $50 a month in child support, citing an income of just $6,000 annually. The court sided with Summer, and the Inmans, especially Will's parents, Bill and Sandra, didn't take it well. By March 2011, just 5 days before Summer vanished, the Inmans were visibly unraveling. Neighbors noticed their weight loss, their distant demeanor. Friends said the children were the light of their lives, and now that light had been taken from them. When police questioned the Inman family, they were found at Bill's 70-year-old mother's home in Jackson, Ohio. All 3, Bill, Sandra, and Will, insisted they had nothing to do with Summer's disappearance. They claimed they had been driving to Cleveland on the night of March 22nd to look at a property, but ran into car trouble and ended up stranded on the side of the road overnight. They described their relationship with Summer as generally peaceful and blamed the real disruption on Adam Peters, the man they all labeled a negative influence, the catalyst for their family's collapse. But police weren't buying it. Narrator: The breakthrough came with a white Ford Crown Victoria, the same kind of car spotted at the scene of the abduction. That exact model was sitting in the Inman's driveway. Investigators seized it and found a GPS unit inside. That GPS told a very different story. On the night of March 22nd, the vehicle had been in Logan, not Cleveland. The GPS had been turned off just before the abduction at 5:30 p.m. and reactivated the next morning, right back in Logan. Phone records confirmed it. All three Inmans were in Logan the night Summer vanished. But that wasn't all. On the morning of March 23rd, just hours after Summer's abduction, the entire family was seen at a car wash, meticulously cleaning the interior of the Crown Victoria. All three of them. No Summer. Later that day, they drove to a tire shop in Cleveland. A mechanic there noticed something odd. Bill wanted to swap out nearly new tires for used ones, simply because he didn't like them. They were trying to alter the car's appearance. Bill had even removed the police-style spotlight from the driver's side, the same distinctive feature noted by witnesses. It was enough. The Inmans were arrested before being taken in. Bill tried to comfort his elderly mother, telling her this was all a misunderstanding, a test from the devil. But behind closed doors, during interrogations, the walls began to crumble. And soon, the truth, the horrifying, tragic truth, would come out. After hours of interrogation and the looming threat of the death penalty, Sandra Inman finally broke down. Tears filled her eyes as she confessed the unthinkable. Yes, they had taken Summer. On the night of March 22nd, 2011, Sandra drove the white Ford Crown Victoria to the bank parking lot. Her son, Will Inman Jr., and husband, Bill, were dressed in black, wearing masks, ready to ambush Summer as she stepped out to take the trash. The plan, Sandra insisted, wasn't to kill her. It was to scare her, pressure her into granting more access to the children. But what happened next was something none of them, not even Sandra, had planned. Narrator: According to Sandra's chilling account, Will grabbed Summer and forced her into the back seat of the car. She fought, but he quickly restrained her with plastic zip ties around her wrists, ankles, and, fatally, her neck. The goal, she said, was to intimidate, not to harm. But the moment spiraled. Summer struggled. Her breathing grew shallow. Then, she stopped moving. Panic filled the car. Sandra remembered her son shouting, "Oh my God, Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." He scrambled, desperately trying to release her, but it was too late. Summer Inman had died, strangled by the very restraint meant to scare her into submission. Narrator: 1 week after the abduction, on March 29th, 2011, Sandra led investigators to her body. She directed them to an isolated patch of land behind the Skyview Faith Church, near Nelsonville, about 30 kilometers from Summer's workplace. A place steeped in personal meaning for the Inmans. Bill had helped build it. He and Sandra were married there 28 years earlier. It was their sanctuary now. It became a grave. Police located a concealed septic tank. A heavy concrete slab covered the opening, secured by 6 bolts. When they pried it loose and removed the lid, the horror inside was immediate. Summer's legs. She had been dumped headfirst into the well, still in her work clothes. Her black t-shirt carried a bitter irony. "I don't have anger issues. I have issues with idiots." Narrator: The autopsy was clear. No bruising beyond the ligature marks. No signs of blunt force trauma. The cause of death: strangulation. Sandra admitted she had originally considered throwing the body into a river, but decided the septic tank would be more secure, a place no one would think to search. She believed it would keep the secret buried, but nothing stays buried forever. Sandra wept through her statement. She expressed profound regret and shame. She insisted she never meant for Summer to die, that she loved her like a daughter, and that her actions had destroyed 3 generations of their family. Narrator: In court. However, Bill and Will Inman took a different stance. both remained cold, emotionless, and distant. They neither accepted responsibility nor showed a flicker of remorse. They refused to meet the eyes of Summer's grieving parents. They offered no apology, no explanation. Sandra, now 47, stood alone in her guilt. She admitted that the plan had been her idea, that she wanted to scare Summer into allowing regular visits with the children, but few believed she acted alone. Narrator. In 2012, the court handed down its verdict. Bill Inman, age 49, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Will Inman Jr., age 28, received the same life without parole. Sandra Inman was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years, following her confession and cooperation. But many who knew the Inmans weren't convinced by her claim of leadership. Friends, former churchgoers, even extended family testified to Bill's control over every aspect of the household. He was the dominant figure, the patriarch. Decisions were his. Will, on the other hand, had been described as spoiled, sheltered, and immature. A man whose parents gave him everything, even when it came to criminal conspiracy. To some, Sandra's confession felt strategic, a desperate attempt to protect her husband and her only son from harsher punishment. Narrator. And what of the children? Summer's 3 little ones, Alex, Kelly, and Alana, were left behind in the ruins of a broken family. Their mother, murdered, their father, grandmother, and grandfather, all in prison for that crime. They are now being raised by Summer's family, but for a long time, it was nearly impossible to explain to them where everyone had gone, or why. One day they will know. One day they'll read the news articles, hear the recordings, and maybe even listen to this episode. They'll learn the truth about the night their mother disappeared, and the dark legacy of the Inman family. Fade to soft piano music. Narrator. Summer Cook Inman was 25 years old, a daughter, a mother, a woman fighting for independence and peace. She died not because she abandoned her family, but because she tried to build a safer life for herself and her children, a life she was never allowed to live. This has been The Crime Whisper. If you were moved by Summer's story, leave a comment. Tell me where you first heard about this case, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the greatest danger lies within the people who claim to love us most. Tonight, we turn to a tragedy that unfolded in a quiet Michigan suburb, a place not known for violence, certainly not the kind that begins with a frightened call for help and ends in gunfire. This is the story of Jonathan Hoffman, a 17-year-old high school senior, a tech whiz, a class clown, and a grandson who, despite the love surrounding him, would never live to see adulthood. Narrator. May 18th, 2012. It began with a phone call. Jonathan phoned his best friend, Max, around 5 p.m., his voice anxious, his tone different. Something was wrong. He confided in Max that he had just failed a court-ordered drug test, part of the conditions of his probation from an earlier arrest. Just 2 months earlier, police had discovered synthetic drugs in his car, and Jonathan had been placed under supervision. Now, he was terrified, not of the police, but of his grandmother, Sandra Lane. He told Max. She was furious. Max listened, growing uneasy. Jonathan promised to text him back in 30 minutes to arrange a time to meet. Max waited, but 30 minutes passed, then 40. Jonathan never replied. Narrator. Unbeknownst to Max, around 5:20 p.m., a harrowing 911 call had already reached the West Bloomfield Township Police Department. It was Jonathan. His voice was shaking. He told the dispatcher he'd been shot and that he was dying. He struggled to breathe, begged for help. But even as he pleaded, more gunshots rang out during the call. Screams, cries, silence, then a woman's shriek, and finally, nothing. By 5:30 p.m., police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene, gated community of Maple Place, a quiet haven mostly occupied by retirees. It was the last place you'd expect a violent crime scene, but that night, it was. Officers approached the front door. One final gunshot echoed from within the home. Then, the door slowly opened. There stood a frail, elderly woman, Sandra Lane, her clothes splattered with blood. Hands raised, she quietly surrendered. Her words chilled the officers. "I just killed my grandson." Inside the condo, officers found a scene straight from a nightmare. Blood trailed through nearly every room. Bullet holes marked the walls and shattered furniture. A 9mm Glock 17 handgun lay near the entryway, empty. Magazines scattered nearby. Upstairs lay Jonathan face down, lifeless. He had been shot multiple times in the chest, back, arms, and abdomen. The wounds were at close range. Some fired as he tried to run. Others, possibly as he fell. Paramedics rushed him to Botsford Hospital. But by 6 p.m., Jonathan Hoffman was pronounced dead. Soft, somber music continues beneath narrator. The news of his death rocked the West Bloomfield community. To those who knew him, classmates, neighbors, teachers, Jonathan was smart, quick-witted, full of potential. He'd been awarded a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. But behind the bright exterior was a young man struggling, following his parents' divorce. Jonathan had initially moved with them to Arizona, but the emotional toll was heavy, especially after his younger sister. Jessica was diagnosed with a brain tumor requiring multiple surgeries. Jonathan began to withdraw, depressed and overwhelmed. He asked to return to Michigan. His grandmother, Sandra Lane, welcomed him with open arms. She offered him stability, a chance to finish high school, surrounded by old friends and familiarity. What no one could have predicted was how tragically wrong that decision would turn out. Narrator, Sandra Lane, 74 years old, a retired school teacher and mother of 5, had taken her grandson in out of love. But her relationship with Jonathan soon became strained. Jonathan was defiant. He often resisted structure, rebelled against rules, and increasingly displayed erratic behavior. He stayed home, isolated, and spent time with peers allegedly involved with synthetic drugs, substances known for their unpredictable, sometimes violent side effects. Jonathan had already been arrested once, on March 17, 2012, for drug possession. He was sentenced to probation, drug testing, and behavioral monitoring. Sandra claimed that following the arrest, Jonathan became volatile, punching holes in walls, smashing electronics, and screaming during arguments. She said she feared for her life, and for her husband's. Police were called to the condo multiple times, so were school officials, but nothing changed. Narrator then came. May 18th, the day Jonathan failed his drug screening. Sandra said that when he returned home, his behavior was unpredictable, his eyes wide, his voice manic. She feared what he might do. That's when she made her decision. She retrieved her Glock 17, a weapon she had legally purchased months earlier, for protection, and opened fire. Narrator, Sandra was arrested and taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation. The next day, she was charged with first-degree murder, later amended to second-degree, due to the circumstances. She pled not guilty, claiming self-defense. Her defense team painted her as an overwhelmed caretaker, an elderly woman doing her best in a situation no one had prepared her for. They cited other tragic cases involving teens on synthetic drugs, who had turned violent, including a recent Michigan case where a young man under the influence beat his family with a bat. Sandra's attorneys asked, was she simply trying to protect herself and her husband from the same fate? Narrator. But the prosecution told a different story. They argued that Sandra was not under immediate threat when she pulled the trigger. Jonathan had been shot once and was still alive when he called 911. Yet, instead of helping him, Sandra fired again and again. The 911 call, Jonathan's own voice, desperate and full of pain, became the central piece of evidence. It was impossible to ignore. Narrator: in 2013, Sandra Lane was found guilty of second-degree murder and using a firearm in the commission of a felony. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 20. She was 75. Music softens to piano lullaby. Narrator: Jonathan Hoffman was just 17. A boy with a scholarship, a future, and a family that, no matter how broken, still loved him. His story is one of loss, layered in tragedy, divorce, illness, addiction, desperation, and ultimately, death at the hands of someone who once promised to keep him safe. This has been the Crime Whisper. If you're still with me, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect, not just on the crime, but on the cracks in our systems, in our homes, and sometimes, in our hearts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, good night, stay safe, and remember, even the softest whispers can carry the darkest secrets. You're listening to The Crime Whisper. Tonight, we bring you a story that unfolds not in a dark alleyway or a distant war zone, but within the beige walls of a quiet, suburban home. A home filled with family photographs, quiet routines, and one teenager's final, desperate plea for help. This is the case of Jonathan Hoffman, a 17-year-old with a bright future, and the grandmother who shot him more than 10 times in cold blood. Narrator: on the morning of May 18, 2012, 74-year-old Sandra Lane took her grandson, Jonathan, for a mandatory drug screening. The results came back positive for illicit substances. It was his second failed test that day. The moment they got back in the car, things escalated. Jonathan, already on probation from a prior arrest involving synthetic drugs, panicked. He began shouting, kicking the dashboard, even grabbing the steering wheel. Sandra, terrified, said she had to stop the car multiple times. According to her, Jonathan demanded $2,000 and the car keys, planning to flee to Arizona to avoid the legal consequences. But Sandra refused. As the tension spiraled, Sandra claims she retreated into fear. She went into her bedroom and came back with a loaded Glock 17 semi-automatic pistol. She said she didn't intend to kill. She only wanted to get his attention. But what followed was anything but controlled. Narrator: according to Sandra's account, she confronted Jonathan upstairs. He was in the bathroom. Instead of calming down, she says he became violent, kicking her in the abdomen, striking her head. In that moment, she pulled the trigger. Sandra says she fled to the basement in shock. When she returned upstairs, she found Jonathan still alive and still angry. She claims he attacked her again, trying to wrestle the gun from her hands. She shot him again, multiple times, but investigators soon began to see another version of events, a version that made Sandra's claims seem far less credible and far more disturbing. Narrator: friends, neighbors, and family members painted a drastically different picture of Jonathan. Yes, he was on probation. Yes, he had experimented with synthetic drugs. But those closest to him described him as gentle, funny, and non-violent. A lean teenager, standing just over 5 feet 6 inches and weighing barely 110 pounds. Not exactly the image of a physically threatening young man, despite Sandra's claims. No one else had witnessed Jonathan acting violently ever, not even his grandfather, Fred Lane, who lived in the same house and was home almost constantly. Fred admitted that arguments between Sandra and Jonathan were common, often heated, but never physical. In fact, Fred once suggested Jonathan be sent back to Arizona, but Sandra refused. She insisted she could handle him. Narrator: Sandra never told anyone, not Fred, not Jonathan's mother, not even police, that she was scared of her grandson, not until after she pulled the trigger. Her daughter, Jennifer, had been in close touch with Jonathan the entire time he lived with Sandra and Fred. They spoke daily. He visited her monthly. There were no signs, she said, that her son was violent or dangerous. Sandra never mentioned being overwhelmed or afraid. If she had, Jennifer said she would have taken him back in a heartbeat. The truth may have begun unraveling weeks before the shooting. Jonathan's probation hearing in April 2012 had left Sandra visibly angry. She had tried to be strict, to guide him, to discipline him, but with graduation nearing and Jonathan still slipping through her fingers, Sandra may have decided to take matters into her own hands. On April 18th, just days after his sentencing, Sandra applied for a concealed pistol license. She visited a local gun shop and purchased a 9mm Glock, the very weapon used to kill Jonathan. Not just any pistol, one loaded with expanding bullets, designed to cause maximum internal damage. She began training at a shooting range, gaining proficiency in silence. Fred, her husband, didn't even know she'd bought a gun. Narrator: on the day of the shooting, Sandra asked Fred to take their dog for a walk, and to stay out of the house until she called for him. He sat outside with the dog, watching a basketball game on a neighbor's porch. He told reporters later that he didn't understand why Sandra had asked him to leave. She'd never done that before. But by the time he heard police sirens, it was too late. Jonathan was already dead. Narrator: meanwhile, inside the house, Jonathan had just spoken with his best friend, Max. He sounded scared, not high, not violent, just afraid. He said his grandmother was furious and threatening to send him away. Minutes later, Sandra claimed he became aggressive again. She said he attacked her, kicking and hitting, and that she fired in self-defense. But there was one major problem with her story. She had no injuries, not a scratch, not a bruise. Medical professionals examined Sandra immediately after the shooting. They found nothing to support her claims of being physically assaulted, and the ballistics, they told a much darker story. Narrator: Jonathan was shot at least 10 times. 6 bullets struck his body. 2 of those hit him in the back as he tried to escape. One was fired while he was already wounded, while he was on the phone with 911. Police believe Sandra left him bleeding, went downstairs to reload, and then returned to finish what she started. Not in panic, in pursuit. Narrator: the final blow to Sandra's self-defense claim came from the toxicology report. Jonathan had no drugs in his system at the time of his death. Only a metabolite was found in his urine, meaning the substance had already broken down and had no effect on his behavior. He was clear-headed and sober when his grandmother shot him. On March 19, 2013, nearly a year after Jonathan's death, Sandra Lane was found guilty of second-degree murder and felony firearm possession. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole after 20. Soft, sorrowful piano music begins to fade in. Narrator: the death of Jonathan Hoffman is a haunting reminder that danger doesn't always come from outside the home. Sometimes it comes from someone who loves you, someone who says they're doing what's best for you, someone who waits until you're alone to make their move. Jonathan was buried in West Bloomfield, not far from the house where he died. He was 17 years old. Narrator: thank you for staying with us. This has been The Crime Whisper. If you're still listening, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on how power, control, and fear can twist the bonds of family into something unrecognizable. Please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. We have more stories to whisper your way as the night deepens and the truth echoes on. Until next time, sleep safely. And remember, even in silence, the darkest stories are still whispering. For Zara, Alina, every step toward becoming a full-fledged lawyer wasn't just a milestone, it was a battle-hard one. Financial burdens, caring for her mother and grandmother, and her own unshakable dedication shaped the stormy journey she walked with unwavering resolve. When she landed her new role in administrative position, it might have seemed modest to some, but for Zara, it was monumental. It wasn't just a job, it was the final puzzle piece in the mosaic of her dream. On her first day, she sent her friends and family a bright selfie. Her smile beamed. At 35, she felt her future clicking into place. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in happiness, to dream of having children, a family, a life grounded in love and protection. Zara was known for her independence, her passion, and her refusal to let obstacles define her, whether it meant switching shoes mid-commute or juggling 3 responsibilities at once. She made space for freedom. She believed women should move through the world without fear, unrestricted, unharmed. But near her home lurked a man who would rob her of that right. His name was Jordan McSweeney, narrator, on a Saturday evening. As the sun disappeared beyond London's skyline, Zara made plans to meet a friend. Though she wasn't in the best mood, she didn't cancel. Her word was her bond. Before leaving, she called her Aunt Farah. There was a flicker of unease in her voice, a rare thing for Zara. Farah reminded her to be cautious. Zara promised she would. That night, Zara and her friend visited Ilford's Big Spoon Bar, a local favorite for weekend gatherings. The night was calm. Laughter, light conversation, and a couple of glasses of water. At the same time, Jordan McSweeney was just a few blocks away, drinking heavily and feeding a dark impulse. Surveillance footage would later show McSweeney behaving erratically, approaching women at a nightclub, hugging them without consent, attempting to kiss one of the employees. Security removed him just after 11 p.m., but the night was far from over. He wandered through Ilford, stalking the streets, looking, waiting, narrator. McSweeney had a long, violent history. At just 13, he had already been through the Kent juvenile court system. By 17, he'd assaulted a girl and served time. In the years that followed, his rap sheet exploded: 28 convictions, 69 offenses, from theft and assault to harassment and weapons charges. Despite this, he was released from prison on June 17, 2022, on parole for a string of violent offenses. He was supposed to check in with his parole officer. He didn't. He missed 2 appointments. Authorities only started the process to recall him 5 days later, on June 22nd. But police weren't notified until June 24th, when they finally arrived at his mother's house to arrest him. Jordan was gone, unwatched, unstopped. Narrator. Around 2:30 a.m. on June 26th, Zara left the bar and said goodbye to her friend. The weather was clear, her house just 10 minutes away. She decided to walk. It was a walk she'd done many times, but this night would be her last dot. Jordan McSweeney spotted her on Cranbrook Road. Chief Inspector Dave Williams later said McSweeney had made up his mind long before. He was going to attack a woman that night. He followed Zara, and when he struck, it was with unspeakable cruelty. He dragged her into a driveway, attacked her, raped her, and left her brutalized and dying. Around 2:45 a.m., a passerby discovered Zara's unconscious body on the pavement. Her clothing was torn, her body marked with the violence of the attack. That Good Samaritan immediately began CPR, desperate to keep Zara alive until help arrived, but the damage was too extensive. Despite all efforts, Zara Alina was pronounced dead at 9:58 a.m. Music shifts slow, mournful strings. Narrator. By then, Jordan McSweeney had tried to vanish. CCTV captured him walking into a park, discarding his bloodied clothes. Calm, cold, methodical. Investigators quickly gathered surveillance footage and fingerprints from the scene. Within hours, they identified the suspect. They tracked him to his van in Gun Hill. He was found sleeping. He didn't resist. Inside the van, police recovered the clothes he'd worn during the attack, with Zara's blood. Even under questioning, McSweeney offered nothing. No remorse, no answers, just silence. Narrator? Public outrage grew quickly. How had someone with his records, someone considered high risk by parole officers, been allowed back into the public without proper monitoring? Why hadn't urgent action been taken the moment he missed his parole meetings? Parole officer Justin Russell later admitted he should have been recalled to prison, and he wasn't. Those few days of delay proved catastrophic. Narrator: the press covered Zara's murder relentlessly, but her family was determined to protect her dignity. Her aunt, Farah Nez, herself a psychotherapist, spoke to the media with poise and pain. She reminded the world that Zara was not just a victim. She was a light, a dreamer, a fighter. The family released a heartfelt statement. The past few days have been unimaginably painful, but the outpouring of support, the kindness from strangers has reminded us of Zara's spirit. Warm, generous, and strong. Narrator: a preliminary hearing for McSweeney was held on July 1st, 2022, with a trial date set. But McSweeney, in a final act of defiance, failed to appear, claiming illness. The trial was delayed. On July 2nd, Zara's family held a memorial walk in her honor. Friends, family, and over 120 supporters marched silently down Cranbrook, rode the path she had taken that night. They wore white dot in honor of peace, in defiance of violence dot, and in memory of a woman who should still be here. Music fades to gentle piano. Narrator: softly. Zara Alina lived a life of purpose, love, and quiet brilliance. She gave everything to the people around her and demanded nothing in return. But on one summer night, all of that was taken. Zara didn't die because of who she was. She died because of who he was, and because systems meant to protect her failed. Narrator: we tell her story not just to mourn her, but to demand better. From our justice system, from our society, because no woman should fear walking home, and no family should bury their daughter for daring to dream. Thank you for listening to The Crime Whisper. If this story moved you, we ask you to share it. Talk about Zara, say her name. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the shadows hold truths most never hear. More than 120 organizations gathered that day, marching in silence, dressed in white, showing unwavering solidarity with the Alina family. These groups, focused on combating violence against women, stood together not just in grief, but in outrage. They called for justice and accountability, and beyond justice for Zara, they demanded systemic change. The failure to stop male violence was, in itself, a form of abuse by the state. At a preliminary hearing at East London Court in Walthamstow, crime scene investigator Nadia Purett gave testimony that would shake public trust. She argued that the local police could and should have done more to locate Jordan McSweeney before he ever had the chance to attack Zara Alina. She further insisted that probation services must also face scrutiny for their inaction. Despite being ordered to appear at that hearing, Jordan McSweeney refused to show. The court proceeded via video link. There, he finally pleaded guilty. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow described McSweeney as a man with no regard for law, safety, or human life. Judge Chima Grubb agreed. She postponed sentencing to December 14th. When the day arrived, Jordan refused again to attend. It didn't matter. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 33 years for the brutal murder of Zara Alina. Jordan's team filed an appeal, and in a controversial ruling, the court upheld his sentence, but reaffirmed that Zara's unconsciousness during the final moments meant she did not suffer. A conclusion that infuriated the public and family alike. Just months later, headlines revealed another disturbing twist. Jordan had developed an inappropriate relationship with a 32-year-old woman affiliated with the Belmarsh Correctional Facility. Though not a direct prison staff member, she was under investigation for misconduct in a public office. Throughout all of this, Zara's family remained united. They mourned her with a deep and private pain, but continued speaking out, especially her Aunt Farah herself, a women's advocate who joined marches and media campaigns to raise awareness. In March 2023, she walked with protesters from West London to Trafalgar Square, their voices echoing, "Silence on male violence is violence itself." Zara Alina's death added one more name to a long and tragic list. But for those who knew her, she remains far more than a victim. She was love, ambition, and light snuffed out by a man who should never have been on the streets. Next case, Sheila LeBaire. Sheila LeBaire was the kind of woman who could turn heads, bright blue eyes, long golden hair, and a soft southern accent. To strangers, she was charming, even angelic. But behind that carefully crafted mask was a disturbed and dangerous mind. Born on July 4, 1958, in Fort Payne, Alabama, Sheila was the youngest of three. She grew up on an isolated farm surrounded by cornfields and cruelty. Her father, Manuel Bailey, was an alcoholic and an abuser. He beat his wife and children savagely. Sometimes, during his drunken rages, he'd lock the family out at night, forcing them to sleep in barns or under the stars, no matter the weather. One night, during a particularly violent episode, Manuel hurled a flower pot that struck Sheila in the head, leaving her with a serious concussion and a scar on her temple that she spent her life hiding beneath her hair. But it wasn't just physical abuse. Both Sheila and her sister Lynn would later allege that their fathers sexually abused them from a young age. Their mother never intervened, whether from fear, denial, or helplessness. She remained silent. Despite all this, Sheila was an excellent student. She dreamed of escapo, a future far from the fields and fists. She fantasized about becoming a singer or an actress. She had the looks. She had the charisma. What she didn't have was support. By 18, she left home. But her dreams quickly ran into reality. Without money or high enough grades, college was out of reach. Instead, she got work as a maid, where her older sister was already employed. It didn't take long for Sheila to realize something else. Her beauty gave her power. She learned to manipulate men with her charm, using seduction to get what she wanted. In the late 1970s, she met a man named Jonathan Baxter. He was young, had a child from a previous relationship, but that didn't stop them from marrying. The union was short-lived. Jonathan ended it after discovering Sheila had abused his daughter during his absences at work. He packed her things, filed for divorce, and never looked back. After her second divorce, Sheila LeBaire seemed determined never to be powerless again. She bounced from one man to another, living off their resources while asserting increasing control over every relationship, but none of them lasted. Most ended within weeks. Sheila was domineering and manipulative, suffocating every partner with her need for control, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Then came the early 1980s. That's when she met Ronnie Jennings, a hot-tempered, unstable man who matched her intensity. Their relationship was a storm, constant arguments, infidelity, physical fights, but still, it lasted over 3 years. In 1984, after another volatile argument, Sheila demanded a divorce. Ronnie refused, not out of love, but to provoke her, and he succeeded. In a hysterical state, Sheila downed a cocktail of strong pills and alcohol, then got behind the wheel. She crashed into a tree at high speed. By some miracle, she survived, but barely. She spent over a week in a coma, followed by months of recovery and psychiatric hospitalization. Later, she told her sister she'd been harassed by a hospital orderly while heavily sedated. But this claim was never investigated. Once discharged, Sheila returned to Ronnie's home, but this time her behavior was more than volatile, was dangerous. During one of many explosive fights, she stabbed at his chest with a pair of nail scissors. Terrified, Ronnie finally filed for divorce and fled, now untethered. Sheila began posting ads in newspaper, dating columns, seeking men she could dominate. It wasn't long before her photo caught the eye of a man named Wilfred Bill LeBaire, a wealthy 60-year-old chiropractor in Epping, New Hampshire. Bill had been married twice, had grown children and grandkids, and lived alone on a horse ranch after being widowed. He was lonely and perhaps, more importantly, financially secure. To him, Sheila appeared perfect, bold, beautiful, and assertive. She sent him seductive letters and even nude photographs. The hook was set. Bill invited her to his ranch, and by the summer of 1987, she had moved in. Bill, charmed and flattered by his much younger companion, didn't object when Sheila began introducing herself with his surname LeBaire, even though they were never legally married. Sheila quickly took over every part of his life, finances, property, and even his business decisions. As he aged, he could no longer meet her physical demands, so according to Sheila, he gave her permission to entertain lovers. One of those lovers was Wayne Ennis, a Jamaican man who initially worked as a ranch helper. Eventually, with Bill's reluctant consent, Wayne moved into the house and, in 1995, married Sheila. For a while, it seemed stable, but it was only the calm before the storm. Meanwhile, a different kind of horror unfolded across the country. In Michigan, a woman named Sherry Miller was manipulating a man named Jerry Cassidy through lies, deception, and, eventually, murder. Sherry faked a pregnancy, sending Jerry ultrasound images and baby bump photos. Desperate to believe, Jerry bought into the fantasy. Then, one day, he received an email from Sherry's husband, Bruce Miller, stating he had taken care of the problem. Attached were disturbing photos of Sherry, seemingly battered, claiming she'd been forced to have an abortion. Consumed by rage and heartbreak, Jerry told Sherry he couldn't take it anymore. He would kill Bruce. Together, they plotted every detail: when, where, and how. On November 8, 1999, Jerry ambushed Bruce in a junkyard, shooting him at close range with a shotgun. Sherry then played the grieving wife, calling Bruce's brother, in tears, asking him to check the yard. When he arrived, he found Bruce dead, but Sherry's act didn't last. Just 2 days later, she was out dancing at a bar, and within 2 weeks, she had a new boyfriend, not Jerry, but a local delivery boy named Jeff Foster. Jerry, who believed he'd killed for love, was discarded. The realization was crushing. Back in New Hampshire, Sheila LeBaire was only getting darker. She eventually began working as an adult phone operator, using her voice to seduce lonely men. One of those men was Kenny Cunty, a sweet, naive, 24-year-old with a low IQ who was extremely dependent on his mother. Sheila isolated him, seduced him, and convinced him to move in. What followed was psychological and physical torture. Sheila turned one room into a makeshift dungeon, where every intimate moment with Kenny turned violent. He became visibly emaciated, bruised, and broken, but he didn't leave. His will was shattered. Neighbors grew suspicious. The store clerk, alarmed by Kenny's gaunt appearance and facial injuries, snapped a photo of him buying 2 large canisters of fuel. That photo would later be used in court as key evidence. His bruises were in various stages of healing. His eyes were sunken. His nose appeared broken. That same fuel, as the investigation would later reveal, was intended for one purpose: to burn his own body after death. After Sheila LeBaire's increasingly disturbing behavior toward Kenny Cunty, things took a dark turn. Neighbors noticed the young man looking gaunt, battered, and frightened. Then, he disappeared completely. When Kenny's worried mother came to the property to check on him, Sheila answered the door not with concern, but aggression. She warned the woman to leave Kenny alone. Every attempt the family made to reach him was met with the same hostility. Eventually, the family had no choice but to file a missing persons report, stating their fears plainly. They believed Kenny might be held against his will on Sheila LeBaire's remote country ranch, the home crematorium. When police arrived at the property, Sheila claimed Kenny had already left. She insisted he ran away, supposedly terrified by his mother's visits. As proof, she presented an audio recording in which Kenny quietly agreed when Sheila asked if his mother had attacked him. It was suspicious, but not yet enough to detain her. However, investigators were familiar with LeBert. Her name had surfaced in connection with a previous boyfriend's mysterious disappearance, though no charges were ever filed. Given the history and growing concerns, police secured a warrant to search the property. What they discovered shocked even seasoned detectives. Fire, bones, and blood. Sheila wasn't home when officers returned, but around the property, several open fires were burning near outbuildings. The flames consumed a strange mix of items: mattresses, hay, broken furniture, all doused in fuel. One of the fires was especially grim. Inside were human bones, visibly charred, with tissue still attached. Reinforcements were called in. Forensic experts began a full search of the premises, and what they found painted a horrifying picture. Throughout the house, there were poorly cleaned bloodstains, a lot of them. Blood was found in nearly every room, and later testing confirmed it belonged to at least 3 individuals. One set of remains was identified as Kenny. It was clear he hadn't simply run away. Confessions from behind bars years later, in a separate case across the country. Another murderer finally told the truth. Sherry Miller, the woman who had manipulated her lover Jerry Cassidy into killing her husband Bruce Miller, gave a televised interview from prison. In it, she admitted everything. Bruce never abused her, never threatened her. In fact, he loved her deeply, and even wanted to adopt her children. The bruises faked, the pregnancy fabricated, the mob connections pure fiction. She confessed she feared Bruce would discover her lies and chose to have him killed instead of facing the truth. She exploited Jerry's depression and blind devotion, knowing she could manipulate him and, likely, the courts too. Sherry was so confident in her deceit, she even rejected a plea deal that would have limited her sentence to 15 years. Now, she remains incarcerated for life in Michigan's Huron Valley Women's Complex. With no chance of parole, back in New Hampshire, Sheila LeBert. As crimes came to trial in 2008, her ex-husband, Wayne Ennis, testified that Sheila had tried to persuade him to kill Bill Labor, the wealthy chiropractor she'd lived with for years. Others described her as volatile, violent, and calculating. Though the defense tried to plead insanity, the court found Sheila fully aware of her actions. The jury convicted her of multiple murders, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release. All of her appeals were denied. She now resides at Homestead Correctional Institution in Florida. Another tragedy unfolds. The case of Jody Sanderholm. While the horrors committed by women like Sheila LeBert and Sherry Miller still haunt the public imagination, the 2007 murder of Jody Sanderholm in Kansas was a gut-wrenching reminder that evil can strike anywhere, even in small towns. Jody, a 19-year-old college student and talented dancer, went missing on January 5, 2007. She had gone to a dance rehearsal at Cowley College, but never came home. Her parents, Brian and Cindy Sanderholm, knew something was wrong. Jody was responsible, punctual, and always in touch. When she didn't show up for a noon appointment and missed a dance performance she choreographed, her parents contacted the police. Within hours, authorities launched a full search. Flyers were printed, search planes flew over wooded areas, and her Dodge Stratus was listed as a vehicle of interest. The last signal from Jody's phone came from a cell tower near the Cowley State Fishing Lake and Wildlife Area, a vast remote region that only deepened their fears. The stalker, Jody's best friend Lori, gave police a crucial lead. Just days before Jody's disappearance, she noticed a light blue car following her late at night. At first, she thought it might be a prank, but the car kept appearing, even after she drove to the police station to shake it off. On the morning of January 5th, Lori spotted the same car near the college and saw the driver again. She didn't know him personally, but recognized him as Justin Eugene Thurber, a 23-year-old local resident. Other members of the dance team also reported seeing Thurber lurking around the college parking lot in the days before Jody vanished. Always alone, always watching. Who was Justin Thurber? Though just 23, Thurber already had a long rap sheet. Between 2004 and 2006, he had been arrested multiple times for drugs, theft, and disorderly conduct. Just days before Jody disappeared, he was arrested again, this time for impersonating a police officer and disturbing the peace, but somehow, each time, he avoided serious consequences. Rumors swirled that he had family in local law enforcement. Whether true or not, the result was the same. He was free, and Jody paid the price. The final hours of Jody Sanderholm in January 6, 2007. A Kansas police officer spotted a light blue Cadillac parked outside the home of Justin Thurber's parents. With growing suspicions about Thurber's involvement in Jody Sanderholm's disappearance, the officer decided to knock. Thurber's father invited the officer inside, and when questioned, Justin claimed he had gone to Winfield, a town about 13 miles from Arkansas City, the day before. There, he said, he met a friend and 2 other men and drove around rural roads until the car got stuck near Sedan. From there, according to Thurber, he walked 4 hours, nearly 30 miles before calling his father to pick him up. His father confirmed parts of the story, saying he had found Justin wet and muddy near Cowley State Fishing Lake and brought him home. But inconsistencies were already emerging. Justin claimed his car had been returned to him by the same friends, none of whom were ever verified. Police had no hard evidence to detain him yet, so they let him go. But the investigation was just beginning. A disturbing revelation that evening. Officers interviewed Alexis Schwartzel, Thurber's ex-girlfriend. She told investigators something chilling. Justin had once confessed that he'd been watching Jody Sanderholm since he was 13. He had spied on her swimming in her backyard and peeped into her bedroom at night, waiting for her to undress. Alexis said she had ended their relationship due to his abusive behavior and disturbing sexual tendencies. She described how, during intimacy, he would choke her unconscious, and how he could only become aroused by violence. Sometimes, he asked her to physically fight him. The police were now convinced Justin Thurber was no harmless misfit. He was a predator, still lacking direct evidence tying him to Jody's disappearance. Detectives arrested Thurber on unrelated charges, bail revocation, and trespassing because he had been seen on the Cowley College campus, despite being forbidden from entering it. The search expands. As Thurber sat in custody, officers served a search warrant at his parents' house. They collected a pair of muddy shoes, the same ones Thurber had worn when his father picked him up, and washed clothing he'd worn the same day. Meanwhile, a search team combed through the Cowley wildlife area, hoping to find any trace of Jody. They spotted shoe prints matching Thurber's, and other smaller prints presumed to be Jody's. Then came the breakthrough. Near a public restroom by Cowley State Fishing Lake, searchers found muddy tire tracks, footprints mail addressed to Jody's parents, Jody's dance shoes, a flip-flop cut-off sweatpants, her leotard, and her Tigarette dance jacket, her wallet containing her driver's license and social security card. A vehicle floor mat and a seat cushion, all of it was dumped near the lake, and the flip-flop matched the footprints found earlier in the wildlife preserve. The Discovery. January 9th, authorities brought in sonar equipment to scan the lake. Deep below the surface, they found Jody's car submerged for days. Not far from there, under a pile of leaves and branches, they made a horrifying discovery: Jody's naked body. The forensics team recovered DNA evidence from the car and her body. Although the lake water had washed away much of it, they found a single short hair in the car. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Justin Thurber. More biological material was recovered from Jody's body, including skin and bruising that forensics determined matched Thurber's DNA. Analysts concluded that 99% of the population could be excluded, but not Justin. Phone records added to the case. On the day Jody vanished, cell tower data placed Thurber's phone in the same areas as hers. At the same time, then came the final nail. The surveillance tape Jody's best friend, Lori Liggett, had already told police she saw Thurber in the college parking lot during rehearsal. College security footage confirmed it. Justin Thurber's light blue Cadillac appeared in the video, and he was seen leaving the parking lot just after Jody. Investigators believe Thurber followed Jody home. When she stopped to collect her mail, he attacked, forcing her into her own car and driving her to the remote wildlife area at Jody's family mailbox. Officers found a shoe print identical to Thurber's sneakers inside the wildlife preserve. They followed two sets of prints, Jody's and Justin's, side by side. Then Jody's footprints stopped, and only Justin's continued, leading deeper into the woods and to the site where her body was found. Thurber's story about getting stuck in sedan quickly unraveled. All three men he claimed to be with denied ever seeing him that day. When police took him to the supposed spot, he couldn't even find it. Trial and sentencing with mounting evidence, Thurber was charged with kidnapping, rape, and first-degree murder. His defense claimed he was mentally impaired, but the court rejected this. Thurber had completed high school, attended some college, and demonstrated deliberate deception, clearly understanding the consequences of his actions. The medical examiner testified that Jody's final hours were filled with terror and pain. Her body was bruised, battered, and showed signs of strangulation, which was ultimately listed as the cause of death. The prosecutor alleged that the crime was sexually motivated and committed with a foreign object. The details were so graphic, they were partially withheld from public release. At trial, 6 women testified that Thurber had stalked them. One even called the police for an escort to her car, afraid because Thurber had been watching her from the parking lot. In another case, he left a rose and a disturbing note on a coworker's windshield. One witness reported seeing Jody in the passenger seat of her own car around noon on January 5th, with a large man driving. She tried calling Jody's phone, but got no answer. On February 17, 2009, the jury found Justin Eugene Thurber guilty on all counts and recommended the death penalty. The judge agreed. In March 2009, Thurber was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The Long Shadow of Justice in 2008, Kansas, passed the Jody's Law, expanding protections for stalking victims and giving law enforcement broader authority to intervene. But justice, it seems, is never quick. Thurber has continued to appeal, claiming mental incapacity. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court delayed his execution in light of a U.S. Supreme Court ruling banning the execution of individuals with intellectual disabilities. Still, Jody's family maintains he is fully competent. Her mother, Cindy Sanderholm, pointed to letters Justin has written to women from prison. "He knows what he's doing," she said. Jody never got a second chance. Why should he? As of 2025, Justin Thurber remains on death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. Although sentenced to death, no execution has taken place in Kansas since 1965. Of the 10 individuals currently on death row, not one has been executed. Closing thought, Jody Sanderholm's death changed her family and her community forever. In a town once thought safe, a predator had been lurking, planning, and watching for years. And in a world where some monsters wear the masks of ordinary men, justice, however slow, remains our only solace. Part 1, A Justice System's Price Tag, 2014. A revealing report was published. Each inmate in administrative segregation at El Dorado Correctional Facility, home to Kansas's death row inmates, costs taxpayers nearly $49,000 per year. But that figure tells only part of the story. When prosecutors pursue the death penalty, the financial toll skyrockets. It costs approximately $395,000 to prosecute a capital case, nearly 4 times the $100,000 it takes when life imprisonment is the maximum sentence for Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. These numbers were more than statistics. They were a cruel reminder that, even in death, Jody's killer was being housed, clothed, and fed on their dime. "It hurts me so bad every week when I see my paycheck," Brian Sanderholm said, "and I know I'm paying tax money to feed him." "Death is what he deserves," Cindy added. "That's what the law says. We need to fix the law so we can use it." Their daughter, Jody Sanderholm, was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by Justin Thurber in 2007, though sentenced to death by lethal injection in 2009. Thurber remains alive, his sentence suspended amid ongoing legal appeals. And tragically, Cindy Sanderholm passed away on December 2, 2022, at age 63, never seeing justice fully served. But Jody's case wasn't the only one in Kansas that stirred public outrage. Just months after her death, another family would face a devastating loss, one that would spark a national legal reform. Part 2. The vanishing of Kelsey Smith. It was a warm spring day in June 2007 when Kelsey Smith, an 18-year-old from Overland Park, Kansas, disappeared. She had just graduated high school, been accepted into college, and was preparing to study veterinary medicine, dreams she had cherished since childhood. On June 2nd, she went to a Target store to purchase a gift for her boyfriend, John Beersmith. Surveillance cameras captured her entering the store, walking the aisles, making her purchase, and leaving. She was never seen alive again. Part 3. A family built on love. Kelsey was born on May 3, 1989, the third of 5 children in the close-knit family of Greg and Missy Smith. Her father, Greg, was a former Navy veteran and had served more than 2 decades in law enforcement. Her mother, Missy, was a dedicated healthcare worker who balanced her professional life with raising 5 children in a warm, structured home. From a young age, Kelsey was vibrant, talented, and kind. She loved singing, dancing, theater, gymnastics, and sports. She played the clarinet in a local orchestra, performed in city events, and even bought her first car, a 1987 Buick Regal, using money she saved from her performances. The Smith household ran on rules, structure, and trust. Kelsey always let her parents know where she was, who she was with, and when she'd be back. She had never disappeared before, so when she failed to return home on June 2nd, her family immediately knew something was wrong. Part 4. A search hindered by privacy. Kelsey's car was found abandoned in the parking lot of a nearby Macy's. Her purse, wallet, and phone were gone. Her phone, and object that could have led police directly to her, was actively pinging off nearby towers. The Smith family begged her cell phone provider to release the data, but the company refused, citing privacy laws. This delay proved devastating. It took 4 days for the company to finally cooperate. By the time the phone's last location was identified, a wooded area near a lake in Missouri, it was too late. Kelsey's body was found in a shallow creek. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The brutality of the crime stunned the nation. Part 5. The man behind the mask. Edwin Roy Hall. The man responsible was Edwin Roy Hall, 26 years old, at the time a seemingly quiet, well-mannered family man from Olathe, Kansas. But beneath that facade was a dark history. Born on April 17, 1981, Hall's childhood was marked by severe neglect and abuse. He claimed he was sexually assaulted by his uncle at age 5, a claim never proven. At 6, he was placed in an orphanage. Over the years, he bounced between foster homes, each time returned for aggression, cruelty to animals, or violent outbursts. At 15, he attacked his stepsister with a knife. A year later, he bludgeoned another child with a baseball bat. But by adulthood, he appeared to have turned a new leaf, marrying Alita, becoming a father, and working odd jobs, including as a mover. To his neighbors, Hall was quiet and respectful, but to authorities, his past behavior suggested something sinister lurking beneath. Part 6. Justice for Kelsey, and a law in her name Danae. Evidence, witness accounts, and surveillance footage ultimately led to Hall's arrest and conviction. He pleaded guilty in 2008 and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But the outcry from the public didn't end there. Kelsey's parents advocated tirelessly for legislative change, pointing out how delayed access to cell phone location data had cost their daughter her life. Their efforts led to the passage of the Kelsey Smith Act, a law that requires cell phone providers to immediately share location data with law enforcement in cases involving suspected abductions or emergencies. As of today, over 25 states have passed versions of the law, and federal legislation has been introduced. Final reflection to young lives. Jody Sanderholm and Kelsey Smith ended at the hands of predators hiding in plain sight. Jody's death revealed the horrific reality of repeat offenders and judicial stalling, while Kelsey's murder exposed the unintended consequences of privacy laws that, in emergencies, do more harm than good for their families. Justice has come, though slowly, and not without cost. Cindy Sanderholm never saw Thurber executed, and while Greg and Missy Smith succeeded in turning their tragedy into life-saving legislation, the pain of their daughter's absence remains permanent. If it was your daughter, Brian Sanderholm asked, what would you want to have happen? Part 1. A life on the cusp of everything. In the summer of 2007, Kelsey Smith was standing at the edge of everything she had ever hoped for. A recent high school graduate, she had been accepted into a prestigious Kansas college to pursue her lifelong dream of becoming a veterinarian. She was intelligent, kind, vivacious, a girl with big plans and a gentle soul. She was also deeply in love. Her boyfriend, John Beersmith, was planning a surprise proposal to mark their 6-month anniversary. He had chosen a custom-made engagement ring and reserved a table for 2 at a romantic restaurant. Kelsey had no idea what was coming, but she too wanted to make the day special. She set out to buy a gift for John, styling her hair and dressing up for the occasion. That Saturday, June 2nd, she left her home in Overland Park, Kansas, and drove to a Target store just 10 minutes away. She would never come home. Part 2. The last phone call. Around 7 p.m., Kelsey called her mother, Missy Smith. She said she'd found a gift for John, but was still looking for the perfect gift bag, something romantic. Missy suggested she check out Oak Park Mall, located just across the street from Target. Kelsey thanked her, saying she'd be home soon to get ready. It was the last time anyone heard her voice. When John arrived at her house at 8 p.m., holding a bouquet of flowers, Kelsey was nowhere to be found. She wasn't answering texts. Her phone went silent, and her parents, knowing their daughter was always punctual, began to panic. They immediately began searching. Part 3. Vanishing in broad daylight that night. Kelsey's father, Greg Smith, a former Navy veteran and retired police officer, took her siblings and began canvassing local malls. When they spotted her Buick Regal parked near a side entrance of Oak Park Mall, they were briefly hopeful. Maybe she was still inside. But after searching every floor, every store, and speaking with security and employees, it became clear Kelsey was gone. Her car, eerily undisturbed, still held the gift she had bought, her backpack, wallet, and $300. And cash were all inside. Nothing appeared stolen. The only thing missing was her phone and credit card, likely in her pocket when she vanished. A single fingerprint was found on the driver's seatbelt. It didn't belong to Kelsey, her family, or her boyfriend. Part 4. A system that delayed hope, despite the Smiths reporting her missing immediately. Authorities initially hesitated to act. Kelsey, at 18, was legally an adult. They said they needed to wait 24 hours before launching a formal search. But Greg Smith wouldn't accept that, drawing on his law enforcement background. He pushed authorities into action and contacted local hospitals to check for any unidentified patients. Meanwhile, police reviewed surveillance footage from Target. It showed Kelsey entering the store, browsing calmly, and then walking out while talking on her phone, her final call to her mother. What no one had noticed earlier was that a man entered the store just behind her. He lingered behind her in every aisle, never approaching, just watching. He followed her out of the store and to Oak Park Mall. Part 5. A predator in plain sight. This man, young, white, with short dark hair and a goatee, was dressed in a white t-shirt and black shorts. He drove an old Chevrolet truck and kept a calculated distance from Kelsey, just enough to avoid suspicion. But cameras caught him, and like a predator watching prey, he waited. Once Kelsey parked at the side entrance, a dimly lit area near a storage section of the mall, he acted. The surveillance footage becomes unclear at this point, but investigators piece together what likely happened. He approached Kelsey as she sat in her car. Under threat, he forced her into his truck and drove away. No one saw. No one stopped him. Part Vi. Bureaucracy and tragedy. Authorities quickly suspected abduction. But when they requested location data from Verizon, the cell phone company delayed, citing privacy laws. They refused to immediately release data, despite it being a clear emergency. For days, Verizon claimed they were looking into it, but every passing hour mattered. Kelsey was out there, possibly still alive. Only on June 6th, 4 days later, did Verizon finally cooperate, using tower triangulation. They located the last known position of her phone, a wooded area near Longview Lake, Missouri, around 30 miles from the abduction site. Search teams were dispatched. Within 45 minutes, Kelsey Smith's body was found naked, beaten, and strangled with her own belt. Her remains had been left in the brush and covered with branches, exposed to the sun, insects, and animals for 4 days. Part 7. The man behind the mask. That same day, police received a call from a woman named Mrs. Miggs, who recognized the man in the surveillance video. His name was Edwin Roy Hall, and he drove the same truck seen in the footage. When police arrived at his home, Hall was eerily calm. He confirmed his nickname was Jack and agreed to come in for questioning. Presented with a photo of Kelsey, he feigned ignorance. Even when shown video of him following her, he claimed it was a coincidence that he hadn't even noticed her. In the store, he was lying. The fingerprint on Kelsey's seatbelt matched Edwin Hall. A search of his home revealed an air pistol with Kelsey's DNA on the barrel. Hall had used a condom during the assault, an attempt to leave no DNA, but he missed one detail. When arrested and presented with the evidence, Hall confessed. He had seen Kelsey at Target, followed her, overheard her call with her mother, and realized she was heading alone to another mall. He waited until she was vulnerable, then used a pistol to force her into his truck. He assaulted and murdered her, then dumped her body in the woods. His motive, he couldn't explain. All he said, disturbingly, was that she had great legs. Part 8. Justice and Legacy. Because Kelsey was kidnapped in Kansas and killed in Missouri, the question of where to prosecute him emerged. Missouri's laws allowed for capital punishment, which Kansas rarely applied. Ultimately, Edwin Hall pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but her family wasn't done fighting. They knew Kelsey might have been found alive had Verizon provided her phone's location in time. They launched a campaign, working with lawmakers to pass legislation that would force cell phone companies to immediately provide location data in emergencies. The result was the Kelsey Smith Act, passed in multiple states and introduced in Congress. It mandates rapid response and cooperation from wireless providers in life-threatening situations. Epilogue. A family's strength, a nation's change. Kelsey Smith should have lived. She should have gone to college. She should have become a veterinarian. She should have said yes to John Beersmith that night. Instead, she became a symbol of all that can go wrong and all that must be made right. Her parents, Greg and Missy Smith, turned their unimaginable grief into something powerful. Through their advocacy, Kelsey's legacy lives on, in the laws that bear her name and in the lives they might yet save. Predators in the Shadows. The Murder of Kelsey Smith and the Killing of Ben Rennick, Part 1. The sentence and the law that followed after pleading guilty to the brutal abduction, assault, and murder of Kelsey Smith. Edwin Roy Hall faced justice. Despite his attorney's attempt to soften the court's perception, highlighting Hall's traumatic upbringing, abuse, and years in foster care, the police fell flat. Not a single person, apart from his lawyer, stood up for him. Even Hall's wife, present at every hearing, remained seated in silence. She refused to speak in his defense. On September 16, 2008, the judge at Johnson County District Court sentenced Hall to 27 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole. After hearing the sentence, Hall finally broke down in tears, turning toward Kelsey's grieving family and whispering an apology they didn't ask for and couldn't forgive. He is now imprisoned at Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he will remain for the rest of his life. Part 2. A law carved from loss, but for Kelsey's parents, justice wasn't enough. Not when their daughter's life might have been saved had Verizon Communications not delayed critical information for 4 excruciating days. Verizon refused to release her phone's last known location, citing privacy laws and the absence of a court order. Though it was ultimately too late for Kelsey, her story led to something meaningful. The Kelsey Smith Act, passed first in Kansas in 2009. The law requires wireless providers to share location data with law enforcement during emergencies when a person's life or safety is in danger. By 2012, 29 states, including Missouri, followed suit. By 2021, Oklahoma, Montana, and Illinois had also passed the law. The Smiths never asked for the legislation to be named after their daughter. It was Kansas Senator Rob Olson who chose to honor her. Since then, the law has saved lives. In 2015, a car was stolen in Kansas with a child still strapped in the back seat. Police used phone data to track the suspect within 30 minutes. In 2021, a suicidal young woman in Illinois was rescued after authorities traced her phone signal to a cliffside just in time. Kelsey's name now stands for more than represents action. Part 3. Death on the Snake Farm. The Ben Rennick case, but not all tragedies result in swift justice. In the heart of rural Missouri, a different kind of horror unfolded, one tangled in family loyalty, betrayal, and cold-blooded ambition. Ben Rennick was just 29 years old when he was found murdered at his renowned reptile breeding facility in New Florence. Known globally for his rare snakes, including a python collection worth over $1 million, Ben had built a reptile empire, shipping exotic snakes from the US to Japan and the UK. He was passionate, quiet, and deeply dedicated to his work, but behind the walls of his snake barns, something venomous was stirring, and it wasn't in a terrarium. Part 4. A family rebuilt and torn again. Ben's journey began in tragedy. In 1992, a gas leak destroyed the family's farmhouse. Years later, his mother, Kim Rennick, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. To cover medical bills, Ben's father, Frank, engaged in illegal stock transactions, decisions that would end in disgrace. The day before the FBI was set to question him, Frank took his own life. By then, Ben had built something of his own, Rennick Reptiles. He met Lindley, a warm, charismatic woman with a young child of her own. Together, they moved fast, cohabiting, starting a family, and later marrying in 2014. Lindley gave birth to their daughter, Amelia, in 2012. They seemed like a couple who had survived the worst, but no one knew that behind the smiles, financial trouble and personal betrayal were eating them alive. Part V. Trouble behind the scales. Lindley and Ben started a second venture, Essentia Spa Inc., a wellness salon run by Lindley, But the spa quickly fell into debt. Tensions rose, especially with Ben's brother Sam, who lived with his wife and children on the same property. Arguments over money, furniture, and future plans began to fracture the once united family. Ben planned to sell some of his rare reptiles to dig the family out of financial ruin. The deal would have earned them hundreds of thousands. But on June 8, 2017, everything collapsed. That morning, Lindley walked into one of the barns and screamed. Ben was lying in a pool of blood, shot multiple times in the head and back. Lindley called 911, hysterical. Sam took over the call, suggesting one of Ben's snakes might have turned on him. But when investigators arrived, they found shell casings on a shelf and no gun-a-clear execution, not a snake bite. Part Vi, suspicions. In secret, no one in the house heard the gunshots, and no one saw the killer. Sam and Lindley were questioned separately. Lindley hinted that Sam might be responsible, alleging he was upset over Ben's decision to sell the property. But Sam passed a polygraph test, and suspicions soon shifted. After Ben's funeral, Lindley cut ties with Sam, sold off the reptile business, and claimed a $1 million life insurance payout. She also tried to sell the Rennick home, the same one her husband had promised to pass on to their daughter. Sam, furious and heartbroken, contacted police with his suspicions, and then the story took a darker turn. Part 7, Poison, Affairs, and Plotting Murder. Investigators learned that Lindley had attempted to poison Ben a month before the murder. According to her former salon employee Ashley Shaw, Lindley crushed 15 Percocet pills into a protein shake and served it to her husband. Ben became violently ill but survived. She then began claiming Ben was abusive, manipulative, and threatening to take custody of their children. She portrayed herself as trapped, telling lies to gain sympathy and, possibly, assistance. Investigators brought Lindley in for questioning 6 times, but it wasn't until January 2020, nearly 3 years after Ben's death, that a breakthrough came from inside prison walls. An inmate, Brandon Blackwell, claimed to have critical information. Part 8, The confession from a cell. Blackwell had dated Lindley after Ben's death. They even had a child together. According to him, Lindley had confessed she had conspired to kill Ben with 2 people, Ashley Shaw, her loyal salon co-worker, and Michael Humphrey, an old boyfriend. According to Michael, on the day of the murder, he drove Lindley to the snake farm, posing as a potential buyer. When the moment came, he hesitated. Lindley took the gun and shot her husband herself. In January 2020, all 3 were arrested. Shaw was granted immunity for her cooperation. Humphrey agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He eventually received life with the possibility of parole after revealing the location of the murder weapon. Part 9, The Trial of Lindley Rennick. December 6, 2021. Lindley Rennick stood trial for the murder of her husband. The prosecution revealed that the plan was born in her spa, nurtured by lies, and carried out with ruthless calculation. The motive: control, custody, and a $1 million life insurance policy. She painted herself as a victim, but the evidence painted her as the architect of her husband's execution. Messages, witness testimony, and forensic evidence all lead back to her. The jury found her guilty. Epilogue: 2 lives taken, 2 different outcomes in the case of Kelsey Smith. The predator was a stranger, hiding in plain sight. In the case of Ben Rennick, the predator slept in his bed. Both lives ended senselessly, but both sparked movements toward awareness, accountability, and justice. Kelsey's name lives on in life-saving legislation. Ben's memory remains a warning that even in the most passionate partnerships, darkness can fester and strike without warning. Chapter 6, Secrets in the Shake. During the court proceedings surrounding the murder of Ben Rennick, startling revelations emerged, suggesting that the murder at the snake farm wasn't the first attempt on Ben's life. According to witness testimony and supporting evidence, Lindley Rennick had attempted to poison her husband a month before his death. The method: a protein shake. laced with at least 15 crushed Percocet pills. Ben drank it knowingly and became violently ill, but he survived. This failed attempt came to light through the testimony of Ashley Shaw, Lindley's close friend and employee at her spa. Shaw said Lindley had fabricated stories of domestic abuse, claiming Ben was controlling, aggressive, and emotionally manipulative. Those claims, investigators later noted, were never supported by any physical evidence or third-party corroboration. According to Shaw, Lindley framed herself as a victim allegedly to justify her desire to kill Ben. That poison plot, though botched, revealed something deeper, a willingness to kill and a cold, calculated effort to do so quietly. Chapter 7. The money, the marital strain, and the plot in court. Lindley admitted that her marriage was under immense financial and emotional strain. Her spa business was failing. The salon wasn't turning a profit, and Ben's reptile sales, though potentially lucrative, hadn't materialized in recent months. Ben was, in contrast, a man of structure and control. He ran a highly successful global reptile breeding operation and had a significant life insurance policy, $1 million in the event of his death. Courtroom documents and testimony confirmed that Ben was fully aware of Lindley's financial troubles. In fact, prosecutors argued this was one of the key factors that motivated Lindley to consider murder. Not only did she fear divorce and losing custody of their children, but she stood to gain a massive financial windfall. Chapter 8. The day of the murder, June 8, 2017. Through cross-examinations and digital evidence, prosecutors reconstructed the events of June 8, 2017, the day Ben was killed. That morning, Michael Humphrey, an ex-boyfriend Lindley had reconnected with just weeks earlier, picked her up from the spa. While Lindley left, Ashley Shaw stayed behind and used Lindley's phone to send decoy text messages, creating a false alibi by making it appear Lindley was still at the salon. They drove together to the Rennick farm under the guise of a potential snake sale. Humphrey wore gloves. Lindley claimed she went only to discuss a divorce. However, she also admitted under oath that she had knowingly concealed Humphrey's involvement and lied repeatedly to law enforcement and her family. Once inside the facility, Lindley claimed she saw Ben and Michael speaking near a sink, but couldn't hear what was being said. As she prepared herself emotionally to ask for a divorce, she heard gunshots. According to her, she froze. But Michael Humphrey, testifying under an agreement with prosecutors, told a different story. He said he initially planned to shoot Ben himself, but hesitated. It was Lindley, he said, who pulled the trigger. He claimed she shot Ben multiple times in the head and back, then left him lying in a pool of blood. In the aftermath, Humphrey disposed of Lindley's clothes while she returned to the spa and showered successfully, avoiding gunpowder residue being detected during forensic testing. Chapter 9. The lies unravel after the killing. Lindley texted and spoke to Michael Humphrey as though nothing had happened. She didn't call 911. She didn't alert authorities. In fact, she didn't even mention she'd been at the scene. When emergency services finally arrived, it was Ben's brother Sam who had called. Lindley was evasive until months later, when Brandon Blackwell, another ex-boyfriend, came forward. He had dated Lindley after Ben's death, and they had a child together. In 2020, while incarcerated, Blackwell told authorities that Lindley had confessed to the murder and detailed the plot, an account that included Ashley Shaw and Michael Humphrey. When confronted, Lindley admitted much of the deception, but maintained that she never intended for her husband to die. Chapter 10. Trial and sentence. During the trial, Lindley's defense tried to paint her as a woman trapped in a cycle of abuse, both emotional and physical. But under cross-examination by prosecutor Kevin Zollner, she stumbled. Why hadn't she called the police? Why had she messaged Humphrey casually after the killing? Why had she lied to detectives, to her brother-in-law, to her friends? Most damning of all, why had she, after hearing gunshots, not checked on her husband? The jury didn't buy her story. On December 9, 2021, Lindley Rennick was convicted of second-degree murder armed criminal action in January 2022. Judge Kevin Crane sentenced her to 13 years for murder, 3 years for armed criminal action, a total of 16 years in prison. Epilogue: a life measured in years for Ben's family, especially his brother Sam. The sentence felt like a betrayal. "How can a life be worth only 13 years?" he asked, staring down the courtroom's final judgment. Ben Rennick, once a rising star in the exotic reptile world, died not from the fangs of a rare snake but from the betrayal of the person he trusted most. A life filled with passion, potential, and love extinguished for money, freedom, and lies. Chapter 1. The girl everyone loved, Mary Goff, was the kind of woman who brought warmth to every room she entered. Born and raised in County Meath, she was the youngest of 5 children, often described as cheerful, grounded, and incredibly close to her mother. They weren't just mother and daughter, they were best friends. In 1993, at age 19, Mary began working at the Huntsman pub in Gormanston. It was there that she met Colin Whelan, a reserved, well-dressed 22-year-old, working in it. He wasn't quite her usual type, more serious and buttoned up, but he seemed stable, and that appealed to her. Chapter 2. A love that turned cold. Their relationship had its highs and lows. In 1995, they briefly broke up. Mary was heartbroken when her mother reached out to Colin, hoping for some closure. He simply replied that Mary's well-being was not his concern. That moment was the first time anyone in Mary's family glimpsed the coldness Colin was capable of. Despite the breakup, they rekindled things 6 months later. This time, they seemed more serious. By 1998, they were engaged during a holiday. Mary was ecstatic, eager to start married life, but the wedding was delayed for 2 more years. On September 9, 2000, they finally wed. But outside the church, something unexpected happened. Mary burst into tears and ran back inside. Friends and family assumed it was grief for her late father, but in hindsight, many now believe it was something far more ominous. Chapter 3. The last day, on March 1, 2001, Mary was determined to start fresh. She had booked a detox program and was focused on her well-being, but she would never attend it. Just after midnight, a 999 call came in. Colin Whelan was on the line, claiming his wife had fallen down the stairs. The operator talked him through CPR, and within 15 minutes, paramedics arrived. They found Mary wrapped in a duvet, her head resting on a towel. But something was off. Mary was cold to the touch, which didn't align with the short response time. Blood trickled from her nose, but Colin had no visible blood on him. Despite allegedly performing CPR, her body lay flat, her head tilted at a strange angle, and there were no signs of fractures, not what you'd expect from a fatal fall. Mary was declared dead at Beaumont Hospital. Her devastated family arrived shortly after. When her mother asked Colin how Mary was, he never looked up. He simply muttered, "She's dead." The lack of emotion in his voice chilled her mother to the core. Chapter 4. A death that didn't add up. The state pathologist, Dr. Marie Cassidy, performed the autopsy. What she found raised red flags. A swollen tongue hemorrhaging in the eyesight, bruise on the left side of the neck carpet, burns consistent with being dragged. Not falling, but notably. No broken bones. Dr. Cassidy concluded Mary had been strangled, but there were no ligature marks around her entire neck, just on the left side. That was unusual. The case was now officially a murder investigation, led by Detective Pat Murray. Chapter 5. The lies begin to unravel when Murray brought Colin in for questioning. He didn't let on that this was a homicide case, Colin claimed. He and Mary were watching TV when she went upstairs to shower. Moments later, he heard a thump. He said he found her at the bottom of the stairs, bleeding, and wrapped her in a duvet to keep her warm. Forensics quickly disproved that story. Blood splatter was found upstairs in the bedroom, and on the landing the phone Colin used to call 999 Had no transfer evidence of mucus or blood though. Alarm logs showed no one had entered or left after 9:45 p.m. A&D. There was no evidence of a third-party intruder. Then came the most damning discovery: a life insurance policy Colin had taken out just 3 months before their wedding. It was worth £400,000 Irish pounds, payable to either if one of them died, valid for only 10 years. That clause ensured its short-term value. Mary's death now looked premeditated. Chapter 6. A murderer online. Murray gained access to Colin's work computer at the bank, but the entire search history had been wiped. Luckily, the bank maintained secret backups. What they found was chilling. Colin had made over 20 internet searches related to strangulation, asphyxiation, how long it takes to die from lack of oxygen. He was also posing as a widower online under the alias Celtic Tackler. He'd told a woman in Wales that his wife had died in a car crash, and they were planning to meet just weeks after Mary's death. He even told her he was coming into a large inheritance. His search history also revealed research into serial killers, including Henry Louis Wallace, who strangled victims using soft ligatures like towels to avoid bruising and kept bodies warm to confuse the time of death. Murray re-examined Colin's home and discovered that Colin's dressing gown, belts used to tie it around the waist, was stretched out unnaturally. Tests revealed Mary's blood embedded in the fibers. The murder weapon, it seemed, had been around Colin's waist while paramedics worked to save the woman he killed. Chapter 7. Flight and Capture. In October 2003, Colin was charged with Mary's murder, but due to legal delays, he was released on bail on the condition he stay with his parents, surrender his passport, and check in daily with the Gardaí. But in May 2002, he vanished. His car was found at Howth Head, with the keys in the ignition and an empty bottle of gin nearby, an apparent suicide. But no body was found. In truth, Colin had fled, using another man's identity. He applied for a fake passport, traveled to Belfast, flew to London, then to Barcelona, and took a boat to Menorca, Spain. Over a year passed. Then, a stroke of luck, an old schoolmate recognized Colin bartending under a new name. He tipped off Gardaí, who worked with Europol and Spanish police, to surveil and eventually arrest him. He was returned to Ireland by Detective Murray, who escorted him off the plane where he came face to face with Mary's brother, now working security at the airport. They locked eyes. Colin looked down in shame. Chapter 8. Trial. And just as Colin's trial revealed a dark past, detectives located a former girlfriend who described a horrifying relationship, violent, controlling, and manipulative. She became pregnant, and when she told Colin, he reacted with rage, trying to force her to miscarry by bringing vodka and aspirin. She managed to survive him. Mary wasn't so lucky. In court, Colin's elaborate lies, his escape, and the evidence left behind painted a damning picture. The jury found him guilty of murder. Epilogue. Mary's legacy. Mary Goff had her life stolen by the man she trusted most. She was not a woman who fell down the stairs. She was a daughter, a friend, a bright and honest soul, whose life was meticulously planned for extinction by a calculating man, chasing money and freedom. And yet, it was Mary's quiet strength, her loving family, and a relentless detective who ensured that Colin Whelan didn't get away with murder. Part 1. The murder of Mary Goffett was April 12, 2005, when Colin Whelan finally appeared in court to face justice for the murder of his wife, Mary Goff. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat the Goff family grieving, exhausted but determined. On the other sat the Whelans, still convinced that Colin was innocent, that the Gardaí had made a mistake, that it was all some terrible misunderstanding. What came next shattered that illusion as the judge asked Colin to stand and answer the charge. The room held its breath. "Did you kill Mary Goff?" Colin replied with one word: "Guilty." Gasps filled the courtroom. The Whelan family was stunned. their faces frozen in disbelief. They had no idea who Colin truly was, or what he was capable of, as the shock rippled across the gallery. The Goff family finally felt a sliver of peace. Asterisk, there would be no drawn-out trial. No need to relive Mary's final moments in open court. Colin's lawyer read out a prepared letter of apology, but it rang hollow. Everyone knew Colin wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he got caught. The court sentenced him to life in prison, where he remains to this day. He's now supported by a woman he met while hiding in Menorca, a British woman who has since moved back to England to be closer to him. She claims she'll stay with him until the end. Mary's family, and many others, see that as a dangerous warning. Colin Whelan never loved Mary. In fact, some believe he hated her and perhaps hated all women. The guard I fear that if he's ever released, he'll pose a serious risk to any woman who crosses his path. Now, more than 2 decades after Mary's murder, her loss is still deeply felt across Ireland's close-knit communities. In small towns, tragedies like this are never forgotten. They linger, generation after generation, as both a wound and a warning. Part 2. The Neil Entwistle Case. A family destroyed. Now we move from Ireland to a quiet cul-de-sac in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, where another young woman and child lost their lives at the hands of a man they trusted. This is the story of Neil Entwistle and Rachel Souza, tale that begins with a charming love story, but ends in unthinkable betrayal. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England. He grew up in a working-class home with his younger brother Russell. His father worked in mining before becoming a labor advisor, while his mother was a school cook. Asterisk, Neil was bright and studious. He attended the University of York, where he studied electronic engineering and business. That's where he met Rachel Souza, an American exchange student from Kingston, Massachusetts. Rachel was everything Neil wasn't: warm, vivacious, outgoing. She quickly became the heart of their rowing team, and the couple's chemistry was undeniable. After a long-distance relationship, they married in 2003. With weddings in both the UK and the US, the pair settled in England for a while, where Neil worked for a defense technology firm and Rachel taught theater and English. In April 2005, they welcomed their daughter, Lillian Rose, into the world. Shortly after, they made the decision to relocate to the United States to raise their daughter near Rachel's family. They moved into a spacious rental in Hopkinton just 10 days before the tragedy. But behind the scenes, Neil was crumbling. Part 3. The double life. Neil struggled to find work. Though he had experience in it, he couldn't hold a job in the States. To make ends meet, he began selling computer parts on eBay, but that venture soon fell apart due to fraud complaints and delivery issues. Desperate for money and escape, Neil launched a shady get-rich-quick scheme through a website promising thousands in income through adult entertainment advertising. That too collapsed. But what investigators later found was far more disturbing than financial schemes. Neil had been living a secret life online, frequenting adult chat rooms and registering on dating platforms like Adult Friend Finder. His profile was crude and objectifying. He expressed a desire to test the rumors that American women are better in bed, and made contact with multiple women, presenting himself as available and adventurous, all while living with his wife and baby daughter. And then, his online activity took a dark turn. Asterisk, in the weeks leading up to the murders, Neil searched for terms like how to kill with a knife, quick ways to die, American gun laws. These searches weren't random, they were premeditation. Part 4. The murders. Neil knew that his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo, kept a collection of firearms. On one visit to Joe's home in Carver, Massachusetts, Neil discreetly stole a .22 caliber revolver he had once used during target practice. On January 20, 2006, while Rachel and baby Lillian slept in their master bedroom, Neil retrieved the hidden gun. Asterisk. He shot Rachel in the head, as she lay sleeping in their brand new four-poster bed. He then turned the weapon on 9-month-old Lillian, firing a single bullet that traveled through her tiny body and pierced her mother's chest. Rachel was 27. Lillian hadn't yet reached her first birthday. After the murders, Neil did not call 911. He wrapped the gun, returned to his in-laws' home to put it back, then concocted a lie that he had found their bodies later and fled in despair. But the truth was unraveling quickly. Part 5. The Escape and Arrest. That same day, Neil drove to Logan Airport in Boston. He made multiple ATM withdrawals, successfully withdrawing $800, though several attempts were declined. He then purchased a one-way ticket to London, carrying no luggage. He boarded a British Airways flight and disappeared. It wasn't until the next day that Rachel's mother, Priscilla, discovered the horrifying scene. Authorities launched a manhunt when investigators uncovered Neil's internet searches, his fake online persona, and the missing gun. The pieces fell into place. An international warrant was issued, and Neil was arrested in London a few days later. He fought extradition, but ultimately returned to the US to face trial. Part 6. Justice for Rachel and Lillian in court. The evidence was overwhelming. Neil's internet searches, his financial troubles, the stolen weapon, the lies, the escape, it all pointed to premeditated murder. He claimed he returned home to find his wife and daughter dead, and only took the gun to kill himself out of grief. But he never called for help. He never told the truth. He only ran down in 2008. Neil Entwistle was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rachel and Lillian's deaths were senseless, destroyed by a man who wanted freedom, money, and escape, and decided that killing his family was the easiest way to get it. A perfect life, a perfect lie. The Neil Entwistle Murders, Part 2, Discovery, Deception, and the Trial of a Family Killer. It was Saturday evening, January 21st, 2006. When neighbors Joanna Gately and her sister Moran arrived at the Entwistle home in Hopkinton, Massachusetts for a dinner invitation. But something felt off. The house was locked. Lights were on inside, but there was no answer at the door. The sisters tried calling Rachel's mother, who had also planned to visit for lunch that day, but had been unable to reach her daughter. With growing concern, they contacted 911 around 8:30 p.m. Responding officers conducted a preliminary search. Sergeant Michael Sutton described the scene. The home was neat, the only oddity being the unmade bed in the master bedroom, with all the bedding heaped in the center. There were no signs of a break-in, no sounds, no visible chaos. The police left at least for now, that nothing was seriously wrong. But the Gately sisters remained unsettled, so much so that they slept outside in their car, in the cold, making repeated trips to a nearby gas station bathroom, just to get through the night. The next morning, a devastating discovery. The following Sunday morning, the sisters managed to enter the home using the garage code given to them by a neighbor. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. There were dirty dishes and leftovers in the kitchen, signs that dinner had been recently prepared. The bathtub still held water, likely from bathing baby Lillian. Classical music played softly. In Lillian's bathroom then, Rachel's mother and stepfather arrived, and together, the group decided it was time to call the police again. When Sergeant Sutton returned to the house for a second search, he noticed something new and unpleasant. Odor, faint but unmistakable, that hadn't been there the night before. He followed the scent through the home until he reached the master bedroom. There, he found a horrifying sight. Rachel and 9-month-old Lillian lay in the unmade bed. Both were dressed in their pajamas. Rachel's body was curled protectively around her infant daughter. They were covered in clothing, as if hastily concealed. An autopsy confirmed the chilling truth. Rachel had been shot in the head. Lillian was shot in the torso. Rachel's DNA was found on the barrel of the .22 caliber revolver. Neil's DNA was found on the grip, but Neil was nowhere to be found. The missing husband back in England. Neil Entwistle was not a fugitive at least not officially. At that point, he was simply classified as a missing person, roughly 36 hours after returning to the UK. Neil visited his parents, Cliff and Yvonne, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire. He told them that he had found Rachel and Lillian dead and had fled, out of fear and despair. On Monday, January 23rd, Neil spoke with Massachusetts State Trooper Robert Manning in a recorded 2-hour phone call later, played in full at trial. Neil claimed he had discovered the bodies, panicked, and attempted suicide, using a knife, but couldn't go through with it. He said he then drove to his in-laws' house in Carver, Massachusetts, to retrieve a revolver, but when he found the house locked, he made the decision to fly home to England, but his actions told a different story. International pursuit. By January 26th, U.S. authorities had traveled to the UK to question Neil. The next day, he met voluntarily with American detectives at the U.S. Embassy in London, but after consulting with an attorney, refused to answer any questions. Rachel and Lillian were laid to rest in Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, in a single casket. Over 500 mourners attended, but Neil did not. His name was omitted from the funeral service and from the headstone. His only contribution was a bouquet of orange rose and a white lily, accompanied by a note, "My orange rose and my lily, for always." Soko. Back in England, Neil appeared to resume a normal life. He dined out in Notting Hill, reconnected with friends, and even went to the movies, but he was being watched. On February 8, 2006, the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office in Massachusetts issued an arrest warrant for Neil Entwistle. The next day, February 9th, Neil was arrested by London's Metropolitan Police at Royal Oak Station as he attempted to board a train. Among his belongings was a notebook with disturbing contents. He expressed affection for Rachel and Lillian. He drafted letters to media editors, intending to sell his story to the highest bidder. He calculated the monetary value of his exclusive rights. Ultimately, Neil chose not to contest his extradition, and on February 15th, he was flown back to the United States. The trial of Neil Entwistle. Neil appeared at Framingham District Court, where he was held without bail. On March 28, 2006, he was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, legal possession of a firearm, illegal possession of ammunition. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Neil pleaded not guilty. In December 2006, jail staff intercepted letters to his family and legal team, indicating suicidal ideation. He was briefly transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation, then returned to Middlesex County Jail. Forensic experts, including Dr. Christopher Cordzes and Dr. David Holmes, would later suggest Neil exhibited signs consistent with Asperger's syndrome, but this did little to change the course of justice. The trial begins. June 2008. Jury selection for Neil Entwistle's trial began in June 2008 in Woburn, Massachusetts. Given the intense media coverage, concerns were raised about whether he could receive a fair trial. Neil's attorney, Elliot Weinstein, attempted to block the introduction of DNA evidence and argued that the police search of the home was illegal due to lack of a warrant. Both motions were denied. Neil chose not to testify and did not call any witnesses. Throughout the proceedings, his lack of emotion was noted by court observers. On June 25, 2008, Neil Entwistle was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole as he was led from the courtroom. He turned to his supporters and said, "I'll be all right." Life behind bars. Initially placed in Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, Neil attempted to shave his head and align with a white supremacist gang for protection. But instead of safety, he received death threats. He was soon moved to protective custody, and by December 2008, transferred to Old Colony Correctional Center, a medium-security prison in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The transfer was made for his own safety after credible threats were made on his life. Legacy of Los, the murder of Rachel Souza and baby Lillian Rose Entwistle devastated not just one family but an entire community. Their lives, full of promise, were stolen by the one person meant to protect them. Rachel was a beloved daughter, a dedicated teacher, and a nurturing mother. Lillian was barely 9 months old, just beginning her life. Their tragic story reminds us that danger can exist behind the most polished facades. What may seem like the perfect life can conceal a perfect lie. Let their memory inspire us to look out for those in distress, to speak up, and to cherish the loved ones we hold dear. May Rachel and Lillian forever be remembered.